Just tested it. Okay, much better. Todd Miller with the HTCSS core development team, talking about version 2 of the Python bindings. Brief outline here. Why are we releasing a new version? Big question. And then why are we telling you now? We're using some of our limited time here at HTC Week to make this announcement. So I should tell you why it's so important that we're doing that. A little bit of a spoiler, there are some things that we would like you to do if you're a current user of the Python bindings. And so the third part of my talk will cover that briefly. And then with what remains of the time, I will try and go over and give you a very brief, very high-level overview of some of the things that have changed between the first and second version of the bindings. Big reason for rewriting the bindings is actually to make things easier on you. I know that sounds kind of self-contradictory, right? You're pushing some changes out and saying that this is the way things are going to be, but that's better than the scenario we're worried about because of some of the software we use to build the version 1 bindings. Boost.python, when I was writing this talk, I took a look at the main branch in GitHub, had not had a commit in 2 years. And we've been worried before then that it was getting harder to build on some of the platforms that we wanted to use it on with some of the versions of the C++ compiler that we wanted to use. And so our concern here, our worry here was that we would suddenly be in this situation, we're on a new platform, we're on a new version of an operating system. After a compiler upgrade, we wouldn't be able to build a version of the Python bindings for you to use. And so rather than crash into that wall, we want to have this nice, easy off-ramp onto a new version that won't have these problems in the future. It also gave us a good opportunity to make some improvements. If you've been using the Python bindings, I'm sure you've seen that we've been deprecating functions left and right, trying to make some improvements, adding new versions in, but never actually getting around to removing the old things because we don't want to break your scripts. Since we're going to have to do that to make this upgrade happen anyway, let's take advantage of this opportunity, make a bunch of breaking changes, improve some things that we haven't otherwise been able to. In particular, we'd like to clean up memory management. I'll talk about what it means to separate the class adds and their component expressions in a little bit. There's some code that does things, primarily block the schd while your code is running out in Python land. That's what our code does. We spent a lot of time and effort in making sure that that blocking period is as short as possible to make sure that the schd can go back doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's not that we don't trust you to be able to do that. It's just that it's hard to make sure that everybody who does, in fact, use the bindings in this way knows that they need to do that and can make that responsibility, execute on it in Python. And so we're just going to go get rid of those interfaces that make that something that you have to do. Boost.python was intended to make the writing the bindings easier. It did that in a lot of ways. It cut out a lot of grunt work. And it made other aspects of writing the bindings very hard because it's a very complex library that very few of us really understand. I think there's only one person in the room, one of the Brians, who really understands exactly what Boost.python is doing and can fix some of the problems we were seeing. And so our hope is that writing to the simpler, smaller, more C-like Python limited API will make things easier on us, will lead to better code. We do less maintenance, we can add more features that you get our Python bindings users are looking for. The other really nice side effect of using the Python limited API is Python minor version independence. Currently, when you install HTControl from the RPMs or from the debs, whatever, you get a version of the Python bindings. Obviously, that works with the version of Conda you installed, but it targets a specific and requires a specific version of Python. 3.6 on CentOS 7, maybe it's 3.12 on Ubuntu 24. Obviously, this is a pain if for whatever reason you need to use a different version of Python for other parts of your work or for other parts of your scripting. So we offer a wide variety of minor versions via pip. This makes things a lot more convenient, but not quite as convenient as they could be, right? If you need to use an older version of Python or a newer version of Python, that's its own special adventure right now. With the new bindings, they're built so that they will work with any minor version of Python 3 after 3.2. And so you'll be able to download that once and use that Python guy's promise, and it seems to work so far in our testing indefinitely, minor versions into the future. So why are we telling you now, spending this time this afternoon at HTCSS24, excuse me, at High Throughput Week 24? We're making the bindings available publicly and more or less supported in HTCSS24. That's due out in August currently. The old bindings will still be there, and I want to emphasize that. You don't have to make any changes, but if you start doing your testing now, it'll make things easier for you in the future because you will be able to tell us this didn't work. What can you do to help me make this transition, fix the problem? It's our aspiration, it is our hope, but not our expectation necessarily that we'll be able to stop maintaining two different versions of the Python binding in HTCSS25. But this is a journey we're taking together, and this whole talk from here on out is going to be about specific things we want to hear from our users in terms of feedback, and please let us know what's going on and how we can make sure this works out for both of us. Part two, I wanted to emphasize that the new API is very similar to the old one. We expect in most cases that most of your code, you'll swap out your import statements and it'll just work. Especially if you didn't use any of the undocumented APIs from version 1, especially if you didn't use any of the deprecated APIs from version 1. Our intention is to keep the 24.0 stable release of the version 2 API stable. Big surprise, right? We'll fix bugs in it as they come up, as we hear about them, as people test their code and find problems for us. I wanted to emphasize we have tended to be very conservative for things that we have documented in the manual otherwise. We do not intend to be particularly conservative for the feature series of the version 2 bindings. I hope and expect that we won't have to make major changes as a result of your feedback, right? That we mostly got it right. But even the minor changes, we're not going to do the formal deprecation process. If we do, it will be from minor version to minor version and not between major versions. So that there was going to be some code churn there. So what you should do, I alluded to this earlier, right? There's this one change you need to make in your import statements to run your current scripts under the new bindings or with the new bindings and test it. The good news here is that almost everything that we did that changed will cause an exception to happen if you happen to stumble on it. So that the failure will be very loud and very obvious and point you at a specific place in your code where you need to change something. There's one exception to that. There's this eval simplify special case that I'll talk about in a little bit. So you test your code. If it works, great. Please do let us know. It's actually really important for us to know how successful we were in making these two APIs compatible with each other. If it wasn't, consult the migration guide, right? I started this kind of taking a guess at what might come up at the limited experience we've had already with some helpful, friendly users. Where the idea here is, you get that exception, you get the name of a method that's missing, excuse me, you get the name of a class that's missing, you run it into the, type it into the search, browser search for that migration guide, you should get a hit on a section that kind of gives you the abstract overview of how things are intended to change rather than gets down to the nitty-gritty details right away of this is gone and it's replaced with this and kind of leaves you hanging. As I said, please tell us what's happened. Optionally, fifth step, potentially also very important. The earlier you do this, the more chance we have to fix whatever problems you find. We would love to hear back from you saying, great, we released 24.3, it has the fix in it you need, you ran your tests, everything worked for you. That will be good and important for us to know. That was the first half of my talk. Now I'm going to get into some of the details I promised you earlier about what's changed. Separated class adds and expert trees. Expert tree is the object name for class add expressions represented in Python. And it no longer stores, it used to in version 1 record which class add it came from. This reflects the way we do the C++ side of the code. And it also had this nice property where if you wanted to evaluate an expression after you had extracted it from the class add, you didn't have to tell us again that it came from this particular class add. If the expression required context, if it had what's called attribute references in it, they would be looked up in that class add that it came from. Of course, this means we had to keep that class add alive, even if that corresponding Python object had become dead and inaccessible. So this was causing us some grief in terms of memory management. That is now gone. And that is why you need to check by hand or with the regex, with the search function in your editors, if you're calling eval or simplify without any arguments. If you are, you should probably in version 1, or without changing to version 2 yet, I guess I should say, figure out how to pass the class add along, context along, if you need to, right? You may well know that the expression you're looking at doesn't depend on the class add it came from. If it doesn't, you're in good shape. If it does, make the changes, make sure that you get the same result, and then run it in V2, and you'll know that will come out with the right answer, and you're all your problems should be the obvious throw an exception kind. Job submission. We keep changing job submission. We're changing it again. We apologize again. Hopefully we've really gotten it right this time. But again, it may, this is one of the areas where I hope we don't have to change anything in the course of the 24 feature series, but it wouldn't surprise me if we did. We got rid of transaction objects. Those are gone entirely. They've been deprecated for a while. They no longer exist. That's this problem where you could open a transaction and then wander off and do whatever you wanted for hours and hours, and nobody else would be able to use the SCED. No more submitting raw class ads. We feel like the use cases for doing so are very limited. None of us feel that we can actually generate a raw class ad correctly from scratch anyway. So if you have managed to figure out how to do that every time, congratulations. We're very proud of you. Please don't ever do that again. The submit object itself has been a dictionary for a while, possibly the entire lifetime of the V1 API. It has accepted different kinds of Python objects and tried to convert them into the submit language on your behalf. That is fraught with peril. The submit language is entirely constructed out of strings and has no type information, and it's not the same as the class ad language. This has some benefits. It has some confusions. To kind of clear things up a little bit, that only accepts strings right now. The good news, however, is that it does accept all valid submit files, and it also understands all valid Q statements. Not only understands and parses them correctly and figures out what they should be, you no longer have to explicitly say when you submit a submit object that had a Q statement, yeah, use that Q statement instead of just Q1. That is carried along in the submit object and knows what's going on. The last thing, possibly the biggest news for some of you, we now have a Python method that duplicates the code. It actually uses a refactored copy of the code from Condor submit to issue credentials on submit that you need to access files in your job. So that should get rid of a bunch of ugly hacks and workarounds that we know people have had to use. I'm hoping we can do something better eventually at some point. I suspect something better will take a long time to show up. I'm a little sad about that. So that might be around for a little bit longer, but it should be a very useful function to have. This is just a quick example. All the complexity here is in the submit file, which is kind of where I think it ought to be. So a bunch of lines of submit file that should look familiar to you. Next line there is just pointing out that we require strings for the values in the submit object when you're using it as a dictionary. And then 2 lines just being explicit, just do the submit. You don't need to pass in anything saying, yes, I really meant use that Q statement that I put in that file. So that's more for reference later. Things that we removed, other changes. XQuery is gone. Again, it blocked the schedule until you were done reading all the ads. This is not a business we wanted to be in. So we removed it entirely. People we've talked to, it seems likely that they've been able to will be able to rephrase their queries in such a way that they don't actually need all that data all at one time. If that is not the case for you, please do let us know. We do have some fairly well thought out, fairly concrete ideas about how to decrease the memory usage of this API, about how to make it faster as well. It's going to require a fair amount of engineering effort. We'd rather put that into other more interesting features. But if there is a use case, contact us, let us know. We can work on that instead of trying to bring back the XQuery API itself. Exceptions. Another thing that we keep changing, although thankfully less frequently than we do the submit interface. We've retained the HD controller and class add exception classes. We've removed all of those subclasses. Those subclasses were mostly intended as a transitional period from just using the native Python types that we had done originally. The idea here, of course, is that we will occasionally catch errors, whether those are lower level OS or IO error type errors or problems at the Condor level with the protocol, with the data we receive. We tried to parse a class add and couldn't, this kind of thing, and rethrow them. When we throw exceptions deliberately, those are going to be those respective module type exceptions. And the idea is that you can catch those exceptions and know that you're not going to catch something that was truly unexpected, like the other side hung up in the middle of a class add, or we weren't able to resolve a host name, something like that. This is obviously a change Hopefully it's not a big significant one. Hopefully none of you had control flows that depended on getting these more specific sub exceptions. If you did, please let us know. We don't object to adding them back. We just thought it was much complexity that could be safely done away with. If it is a control flow issue, maybe there are other alternative APIs that we could introduce. I meant to mention earlier, maybe put it on a slide and didn't say it aloud. One of my goals for version 2 has been to have more comprehensive and more precise documentation. There are some places in the documentation where we tell you where these exceptions are raised and why. There are certainly some some instances where we raise these exceptions that are not currently documented. We're going to be working on that. So those were that was everything that I wanted to mention. This is the email address for contacting us later on or right away. But I think we do have a few minutes now if people have specific questions to ask.